is Fox Business. We got Stuart Varney, the Varnicle, who's just not a great guy. You remember Stuart Varney, Lace? I think I got to take this off for a second. So Stuart Varney hosts a show on Fox. I forget what it's called. Every time I think about Stuart Varney's, the first time I saw him was years and years and years ago, and it was Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. And Stuart Varney had this whole article about we have to cut all welfare because poor people actually aren't poor because they own refrigerators. That was his whole argument.
That's a hell of a theory you've got going there, buddy.
Well, how can you be poor if you have a fridge?
Like, that's the marker?
Yeah, and then Jon Stewart's whole response was, he's right. Those food chillin' motherfuckers. So every time I see Stuart Varney, I think about that.
Oh my goodness gracious.
So he's talking to Mike Rowe and Mike Rowe's mom. So I feel bad about kind of doing this with Mike Rowe's mom in the room, but it has to be done. And they're going to talk about, there we go. Sorry. God, we're having technical problems today. They're talking about Jamie Dimon was asked something, and I'm going to tell you what he actually said. They do quote part of it here. So let's watch this, and you tell me what you think, Lace. Is that better? Lace?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Mike Rowe and his mom, Peggy. Now, Peggy, we are going to talk about that extraordinary new book you've got, Vacuuming in the Nude. We'll get to that, I absolutely promise. But first, I want to talk to your son here, Mike Rowe. You're on with your mom?
Yes, look, this can't possibly go wrong.
Oh, easy. Let me explain this one. The CEO of JP Morgan Chase is Jamie Dimon. He believes there's some truth, that's his words, in China's claim that the U.S. is incompetent and lazy. I'll give you a quick quote. They kind of look at America and say, you've been incompetent and lazy. There's truth to that. We've screwed up infrastructure. We've screwed up inner city schools. The bottom line here, Mike, is, do you think that Americans are lazy?
All right.
Even if I do.
So here's where I have to hold my nose and say, I hate that you have to do this. I agree with Jamie Dimon. Right? Now, but I agree with what he actually said. He said the U.S. is considered lazy by China, and that's true because we didn't pay for infrastructure. We screwed that up, and we haven't paid for our schools, or especially he was in inner city schools, but those were examples he was giving, right? What he didn't say was individual Americans as a whole are lazy.
Right. I was going to say I wasn't hearing what felt like an individual sort of attack yet. This was sort of like broad generalization.
Well, he was talking about the government. He wasn't talking about the American workforce. He said the Chinese think the U.S. is incompetent and lazy, not the American workforce, the U.S. government, right? And the two examples he gives...
didn't actually say the American people. He didn't say that.
No, and the two examples he gives are examples of government things. Infrastructure and schools are government programs, right? And he was saying you effed those up. You screwed them up, essentially. And he's right, because you got to think about it, too, from a business perspective, because he's an actual businessman versus somebody who's a talking head on Fox, or like us, a talking head on a show. But he's got to think about things practically. I mean, as a businessman, I want good schools. Why? Because I don't want stupid employees that I have to spend a ton of money training. I pay taxes. Send me educated people, right? Don't send me idiots, right? Infrastructure, he's right. I pay taxes. I want the roads to work well. I want the internet to work well. I want my phones. I want police.
I want our kids to be able to read stuff.
Yeah, I want sewage and running water and electricity.
Sewage is great. I like sewage.
Especially
when it's not in my water.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I want food that I can eat and I know I'm not going to get diarrhea. I want clean water. I mean, this is all government stuff, right? So Jamie Dimon's got a point. We should be investing more in that kind of stuff, in the quality of life, because it helps business. And that was kind of his point. They immediately have to take it, though, because they're conservatives. No, we're talking about Americans as a whole are lazy. Because the whole narrative they have to tell all the time is there needs to be a hierarchy of people. Some people deserve more and some people deserve less, right? It's our whole joke with Worthington's Law. Worthington's Law, by the way, kids, is a made-up thing, but the theory is the more money you have, the better person you are, right? Right? But that's how they think. And that's part of what permeates the thought process in finance and is a problem. Now, Mike Rowe's been making the rounds on Fox News and other places, but Mike Rowe definitely believes that. He's going to soft soak it a little bit, but he definitely believes that here.
Ooh, I don't want to hear it from China, right? No, I think Americans, like the Chinese, are human, and I think when you give humans a choice, when you give humans an easy button, they'll hit it. I will. I think we're all born with this idea that we're like rivers trying to get to the ocean. You get to a mountain and you don't go, oh, I'm going to go over that thing. You go around it. You zig and you zag. So look, when I talk a lot about this with my foundation, we offer work ethic scholarships because we believe that the fault in our stars is a certain kind of inaction. We need to be encouraged to do the hard thing, the difficult thing. We need to be suspicious of the easy thing. Yep. Right? And so, that's life. We reported that since March, 400,000 people have walked away from the workforce. There are 400,000 fewer employees now than there were in March of this year. Yeah. What happened? Well, they were given an easy button. In part, right? I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but if you're able to support yourself by not working versus working, it doesn't make a lot of sense to wring your hands over the fact that a lot of people will choose not to work.
Okay, so that's a lie. That is absolutely untrue. Not necessarily a lie. He probably believes that, but it's not true. In fact, we found that when you do help people out and give them opportunity, people tend to work more. Why? Because they can get more out of it. Because they're not just doing it to just survive. They're doing it to get ahead. And when people are doing things to get ahead, they're more ambitious.
I feel like he was trying to tie two things together that are very, very different with one statement, actually. So, because there's sort of two subsets of this, right? There's exactly what you just said there, which is giving people, resources, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But based on his statement, there's a different sort of subset that's not even in the same category at all, which is people who can support themselves without working. And that's kind of closer to his phrasing, although I think he's talking about the group you just mentioned.
Right.
The group that needs to utilize some resources. But there's a subset of people who perhaps are able to support themselves without work, and they really might opt not to actually work. But lumping both of these categorically under one sort of umbrella doesn't make sense. These are two distinct, different sections of people.
Right. Well, let me clarify. So what he's talking about is during COVID, people got relief checks from the government.
Right. Absolutely.
And he's saying that
way better relief checks in most other countries, by the way.
Right. And ours were not as good as most other countries. Like Spain is still giving everybody a relief check. Or Portugal and Spain, I think.
The Canadians did way better than we did too, of course.
Well, in fact, their economy did really, really well during COVID and did even better in recovery. And so I know the Portuguese have said, well, we're just going to do this universal basic income permanently. That way, if there's an emergency again, it's already in place. We don't have to freaking do anything. It's already done, right? But that's the problem is he's saying, look, if the government gives you money, you're not going to want to work. That's not true.
Well, let's also just stop and stomp all over what he's saying there too. I mean, first of all, he said it very poorly because he said a very broad generalization. Second of all, if you can support yourself, that is what he said. If you can support yourself without working, who on God's green earth was being able to support themselves long term on these like random little kicker checks and whatever? I mean, the unemployment benefits that did happen during that time for people were much better than what they are typically.
Right.
But they even had a specific duration of time. So that's not like something you can stay on forever, you know?
Right. Well, the other thing too is this is so, and we'll get more into this in a little bit, but a lot of it is, so you still have about 4 million people that aren't back in the workforce. The big figure on that one is you have at least 1.8 million women that left their jobs and haven't come back since COVID. All right. And I know, like, they like to mock, like, don't get a degree in feminism. There's no jobs in that. There are lots of jobs in majoring in women's studies. Believe you me, businesses will pay you a lot of money to help them out to hire women to do research, think tanks, legal firms. I mean, yeah, there's lots of jobs in that. But I was actually reading an article recently, and if I can find it, I'll link it back down here. But they were talking about this, and the woman who has a degree in economic women's studies, right, was paid a ton of money, and she figured out, well, you could probably get 1.8 million women back into the workforce shortly, but what you'd have to do is you'd have to create laws that would equal the pay gap between men and women, because that would incentivize them to come back, and you'd have to put in a little bit stricter rules and regulations about how to manage problems within the workplace, because the bottom line is you only have a handful of female CEOs, and yet women are 53 or 54% of the population. More women graduate from college now than men. It's true. Like 57 or 58% of college graduates are female. You know? So it's one of those things where, we don't include women enough. We've never even had a female president. So you can't tell me that women are equal to men in this country. Just cannot make that argument.
Right?
But if you started making...
You could make it sound really ridiculous.
Right.
Really ridiculous.
Right. It reminds me of one of the few smart things I've ever heard Bill Gates say. Not to say he's not a smart guy, he is, but he was in Saudi Arabia. He was at a conference, and in Saudi Arabia, it's very segregated. So the women were roped off on one side of the room in burqas, and the men were on the other side. And the women weren't allowed to question him during the Q&A portion, the question and answer portion. And one of the guys asked him, well, what would you do if you wanted to boost up, our economy? Like if you were running our economy? And Bill Gates flat out said, well, the problem is you're not utilizing half your workforce. Half your workforce is sitting there and they're not doing anything. Not because they don't want to. Otherwise, why would they show up here? Right? Yeah, man, they want to work. But that's the problem I have with this whole analysis is, in general, people want to work. This is evolutionary. Animals that don't want to work tend to die. That's just a fact. I mean, animals who don't want to go hunt or go scavenge for food or whatever tend to die. But he can't wrap his head around that. He's got to put blame on individual as opposed to looking at it systemically. But the beauty of that, and this is what I love about this sort of thought process, the Worthington's Law, wealth equals better than thought process, is if I put blame on, well, just some people are just lazy or worthless, then I don't have to do anything. Right? It's not that there's a systemic problem and we're just not educating or helping people. Right? No. If they're just lazy and worthless, then there's no expectation for us as a society, because that's just how it is. They're just lazy and worthless, so we can ignore them. That's the problem.
He's just got such like a ridiculous framing for it. I mean, it just makes me crazy. Even the way he framed it, going back to what I already said, is the literal words that came out of his mouth suggested that these resources people were given is something that can make them afford to not work. Like
Right.
that this is something they could just like live off of indefinitely. Because
Yeah,
you say people that can afford not to work because of something, we're really talking about, you're not talking about those people, you're talking about people who have like passive income and all of that stuff, but that's not who he's actually talking about.
No.
He's talking about people who received these resources to sort of help them get through a certain time frame, but he's framed it as if it's like some sort of thing that they could actually live off of.
Right.
You can't live off of that for more than just that finite little period of time.
Well, and furthermore, he's talking about the COVID checks, which were combined were like $6 or $7 grand over a year. That was not to live off of. That was so people wouldn't die or starve. It's so they could stay home and not get COVID.
There was also the really souped up, unemployment. The unemployment was the best unemployment people have ever gotten. But again, it's for a very specific duration of time. You can't be signed up for that for your entire life or something.
And even the souped up unemployment wasn't that much money.
No, it was just significantly better than unemployment tends to be.
It was just, it was poverty wages, but it was to help people not starve and not die. And you want to talk about this? This is the problem: is you're losing the bigger portion of this, which is a reason we don't have a lot of these jobs is we're getting over the pandemic, right? A pandemic, which I want to tell you, has killed more Americans than we've lost soldiers in every war we've been in. More people died of COVID than U.S. soldiers have died in the history of this country. I mean, I don't count the Confederates because they weren't U.S. soldiers, but so if you count them, maybe it's about the same or a little more. But they weren't U.S. soldiers; they were traitors, and so who killed U.S. soldiers. So, but that's my point: is they're missing the big point, and then once again they have to spin this where Jamie Dimon didn't say that. Jamie Dimon's critique was of government policy. Not taking care of the people, not taking care of infrastructure, not getting people educated. That was what he was saying. The other thing they missed, and they cut this part out of the quote, because I went and looked up what Jamie Dimon actually said. And he was talking about China, and the first thing he said was, autocratic systems work well in certain circumstances, but they don't work in the long run. Which goes back to our original point, transactional leadership, right? Is how China works. It's a carrot stick. If you don't do it, we're going to imprison you. It's an authoritarian government in China. These people don't have a choice to work. They're ordered upon pain of prison or death. Right? Americans aren't, which is where Jamie Dimon finishes his point by saying, yeah, but as Americans, we have the edge. Why? Because Americans work because they want to work, because they want to get ahead, because they can. That's the edge. The edge is they're free. You're going to get better results if you encourage people and give them a chance to get ahead. That was Jamie Dimon's whole point. And they just skimmed right by it and went to, no, yeah, there's people who are lazy. And if you make it too easy on people. So what are they doing? They're making the Chinese argument. We need to be authoritarian. We need to force people, and we need to make it harder for them and not give them help and make them work during pandemics. That's kind of what he's saying. But it is what he's saying.
Just more defeating, really.
It is. It is what he's saying. But the thing about it is Mike Rowe's saying it in his very charming, charismatic Mike Rowe way. He's more charismatic and charming than we are. I mean,
it's because he has such a nice voice.
I know. And he's a good-looking guy, and yeah, he's just so TV. Look how TV ready he is.
With that nice voice, you can just say anything if you have that good of a voice.
God, I know. I wish I was Barry.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I could believe almost anything James Earl Jones has to say. I mean,
yeah. Well, there are days
voices,
There are times I wish I was Barry White, man. Hey, baby. Never gonna give you up.
All right. Keep your day job.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, look how TV ready he is versus us.
Right?
Yeah, he's way better at the visuals than we are.